See if we can get it up here. Okay. Oh, got to have my Bible, ain't I? You forget my Bible. Might need that. Yeah. All right. Well, it's good to see everybody out. Happy Father's Day to everybody. Uh, Sorry we didn't have any music today. I figured give you guys a break from my bellowing. Yeah. Yeah. Probably won't be any music next week either. Yeah. No. Sometimes we do things a little different. Um, this week, I want to start a new series. Let's see how far we go in this on the Sermon on the Mount. You know, we spent time in Abraham, looking at Abraham, and I wanted to come back over into the New Testament. We had a couple of weeks where we were talking, you know, like we did last week with kind of the levels. I don't know, I hated to use that word level, but we talked about the gospel. But I wanted to go back into the Sermon on the Mount and maybe give it to you in a way that you've never heard it before. And I'll tell you this, guys, I don't try to be controversial. I really and truly don't. But things are controversial because of the way we perceive things. You know, I heard this morning, and I know these things are very, very popular, you know. A guy was preaching, and everything he says was a warning. This may be your last chance. You know, you better. And you know, when I think about that stuff, I won't say it drives me crazy, but I just know it's so untrue. And the God that most people know, I wouldn't want to go to heaven and spend eternity up there with him, honestly, because he's not good. I mean, what happens when you mess it up? You're going to be kicked out. So unless you know, when you go to heaven, I guess he's going to put magic dust on you where you're never going to be able to mess up again. That just to take the you out of it. And you know, in our society today, if you remember what we talked about last week about the simplicity and how everything is dualism, I mean, that's where it is. It's good, bad, right, wrong, up, down, left, right, us, them, Republican, Democrat. I mean, that's all it is, division, division, division. And everybody's drawing a line in the sand of whose side are you on, and you better get right, and you better, you know, it's like God is up there and he's got one big old eye looking down at you, and you better get it right, or he's really gonna get you. And today, as we go into this Sermon on the Mount, I'm going to tell you that most people read the Sermon on the Mount with that mindset. Really and truly. And myself, I go back and I look and I think, wow, I can see why we would think these things. Sermon on the Mount. So as we go in to look at this, this is actually Jesus' first major sermon. What a way to come out of the gate, you know. This is before he's really, really, really famous. Now, he's beginning to get there, but, you know, this is one of those. And really, and I hope you'll hear this today, this is one of those sermons where if we're paying attention, everything changes before our eyes. And when I say one of these sermons, there's a few sermons in the scriptures from Jesus, this being one of them, Sermon on the Mount. But do you think Jesus was preaching from a pulpit like we do today? You know, most of Jesus's teaching today is very, 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 are you getting my drift? Very unpopular. But what did Jesus do mostly? He taught. He told stories. He sat around and said, well, let me tell you about a sower sowing seeds. Let me tell you about fishing with a net. You know, let me tell you about a good Samaritan. You know, he was always teaching in that way. It wasn't like every Sunday he was gathered out and had a big church service, and that's the way it was. But if we're really paying attention to what Jesus says here, everything will change before our eyes. Now today we're going to move through the first 10 verses of this Sermon on the Mount, which is traditionally known as the Beatitudes. But I'm really today going to be focusing on the first 3 because they really sort of set the stage for everything else that follows in this series, as we're going to be going through this. And in this Sermon on the Mount, we get a young, fresh face to Jesus who has just launched his public ministry. He's been moving through the area. He's did some teaching. He's did some healing. He's performed some miracles. There's a buzz building. A crowd gathers out to hear him, and so Jesus pauses to speak to him. And this sermon actually runs from Matthew 5 all the way to the end of chapter 7. But I want to start today by backing up just a little bit to Matthew chapter 4, verse 23. Now, I'm going to be reading out of the NIV. Jesus went through Galilee, teaching in their synagogues, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom, and healing every disease and sickness among the people. News about him spread over Syria, and people brought to him all who were ill with various diseases, those suffering severe pain, the demon-possessed, those having seizures, and the paralyzed, and he healed them. Large crowds from Galilee, the Decapolis, Jerusalem, Judea, and the region across the Jordan followed him. Now when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up on a mountain and sat down, and his disciples came to him, and he began to teach. I love that. He goes up on a mountain, goes up on a hill, he sits down, and he begins to teach. But I want us to get this picture in our minds here. Huge crowd gathers, all coming to hear Jesus. He notices the crowds. He goes up on a hill where they can see him. His close friends are gather out to him. They're close. And he teaches them in a George Whitefield fashion in an open air sermon. No microphones, just boom. But first, it's important to notice who Jesus is talking to. It says the crowds came from Galilee, Decapolis, and Jerusalem. If these things weren't important in the scriptures, then why are they there? Now, Galilee, that's where Jesus is from. Now, this is a very religious place, but it's very blue-collar region. These are Jesus people. These are people with rough hands, workers, And Jesus knows these people. He grew up with these people. I like to call them country folks, He gets them. These are his people. And one thing you got to remember here is that Jesus come from the other side of the tracks. We forget that. Jesus come from the other side of the tracks. He's from Galilee, not Jerusalem. It's kind of funny, but like if you was to go to Walmart's and you would see Jesus at Walmart's, he's probably maybe one of the people you would avoid. He's kind of one of them. And I know you kind of think, well, that's really not true. Well, the scripture tells us in Isaiah there was no form or comeliness about him that we would desire him. He's not one of these Brad Pitt kind of guys, strong and muscular and charisma falling off of him and all of that. You just kind of, no, he's one of them. Now, Jerusalem, we kind of know that place a little bit. These are also Jewish people, probably very religious people, but probably people that are a little bit more fancy, A little bit more fancy. These are people that come from the city. They know how the world works. They understand power. They understand politics, and they probably got a much better grasp of the intrigue of Rome and what's going on, because never forget, guys, all of them, they're not free people. They're living with the Romans are right there. Their oppressors are right there. We forget. See, in America, it's hard for us to think that way, Their oppressors are right there. Tower of Antonio is right there. They want to go up there to the temple. Man, they got to bypass the Romans, soldiers and their horses and their flags and all this stuff. It's all right there. And I'm going to just throw this out there. This is kind of free material. Don't have anything to do with today, but when I say the intrigue of Rome, Jesus talks about the temple that Herod had built. And, they kind of make the response. Well, what was it, 40 and some years building this temple, and he's going to tear it down in 3 days and raise it up again. And if anybody has ever wondered about this, and, the temple that he built wasn't Solomon's temple, but he rebuilt it, and there was all this gold, and, it was magnificent, and it was beautiful. Do you ever stop and think who paid for that temple? The Jewish people didn't have the money to pay for it. They're being oppressed. Who paid for that temple? See, these things, I'm going to tell you this. I was up at the rest home on Wednesday, or not on Wednesday, on Monday. And I was ministering to those people, and sometimes you get some other people who come in, And, I'd said some things and, about how, about Jesus' name being wonderful and things to be wondered at and pondered over and contemplated. And, it was told to me that if it's not in the scripture, we're not to wonder about it at all. And I thought, wow, his very name is wonderful. I mean, it's to be contemplated. But that's kind of, it's like, well, we're not supposed to think about that. But these very scriptures themselves are drawing us in to use our imagination, to think outside of the box, to draw us in to imagine our world, our society a better place. And if you could understand this, maybe we could get a hold of the politics and everything that was going on a little better, because I can tell you who paid for that temple that Herod had built was Caesar. Now imagine, who is your allegiance really going to be to when you're a king over the Jews, because that's what Herod was. He was an Edomite. And he's going to build the most fantastic religious temple for all the Jewish people in the most holy city in the world, and Caesar's going to pay for it. Who is Herod and the Jewish people's allegiance going to be to? And you think, well, that's not true. When Jesus, they got him standing before the people, what did they say? We have no king but Caesar. I mean, if you can understand how these politics kind of play into all of this stuff. Do you think they do today? So here's these religious people from the city, the fancy people. They know how the world works. They know how the politics work. This is where all the religious leaders in the Jewish culture would be found, in Jerusalem. Now, they have things in common with the people from Galilee. One thing is they're all Jews. But at the same time, these are very different areas. There's the more rural. They ought to change that word, shouldn't they? They're the more country folks. Rural route, rural king. Maybe I'll just say it like that, rural king. The less sophisticated reason that Jesus knows from his childhood, right? It's where he grew up. Then there's the city where the leaders and all the elites are. You remember that time that word about Jesus is starting to spread around, and this guy Nathaniel he's asked if he's ever heard of Jesus, and you remember the statement he makes, can any good thing come from Nazareth? That's kind of the attitude that you might expect in Jerusalem. So there's Galilee, there's Jerusalem, and we also got Decapolis tucked in there, remember? Decapolis. Now, that was a collection of Roman cities. I think in maybe in the margin or something it says it was a collection of 10 cities. But these were Roman cities southeast of Galilee. These were not Jewish people, and in the eyes of the Jewish people, these were not religious people. What a mixed crowd. And in fact, for a lot of people that Jesus would have grown up with, certainly for the religious leaders from the city, these were people you avoided at all cost. You know, the people that your mom warned you about. Don't go around them people, Don't play with them. Let me say it this way, and I'm just kind of poking fun here, but these are the people, with tattoos and smoke cigarettes and ride motorcycles. I'm just poking fun at everybody in here that smokes cigarettes and has got tattoos and rides motorcycles. Dad being one of them. Them kind of people. Isn't that amazing? That's, and that's kind of a bias, a prejudice that we have. And yet, here they are all mashed together in this sermon. Blue-collar Jews, big city moguls, and Roman pagans, all lumped together here. And everybody here is to see what this guy from Galilee, this guy from Nazareth, where no good thing can come from, has to say. Like I said, a little buzz been around. Done healed some people. Done a few miracles. What's going on with this guy? So here they are, kind of all gathered out. And that's an important part of the story. But as we go through this, we need to talk about things, because we're just looking at these verses, but really, probably three of them, we're going to have to talk about the meaning of the word meek, the source of our blessing, poverty of spirit, and why making Jesus make sense is actually missing the point. Why making Jesus make sense is actually missing the point. Because that's what we always want to do. And you know what we always want to do is we want to make Jesus' words, I'm going to say this, fit in our white little world. Our white little Caucasian American world. So we'll chop it and dice it and fit it up just the way it's supposed to be. To keep us on top, So let's read Matthew chapter 5. I'm going to start back in verse 2. And he began to teach them. And he said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." What we have here is a series of 8 declarations that we call the Beatitudes, which you probably didn't know this, which comes from the Latin translation of the Greek word for blessed. And I don't know if you ever read this really, really close, when you really study it and look at it and ponder it. I know from the surface reading, hey, it makes perfect sense, right? But if you ever read this really, really, really close, does this make sense? I mean, according to our Western culture bias and all the things that we're to aspire to and all of this, does this make sense? I know when we read it, it just makes perfect sense and we're just, But do you ever really ask the question? And I know this is kind of one of the things that people will come at me and I get accused of a lot of stuff. But do you ever ask Jesus and say, "Jesus, have you ever spent any time in the real world here?" I mean, are you trolling us? Do you know what's really going on here? What happens is, instead of trying to actually sit with what Jesus is saying Instead of trying to allow his imaginations to infect us, and when I say infect us, we forget this, Paul writes, and, be ye transformed by the renewing. We say that all the time, but we don't believe it. What we really want is everybody else's imagination to be changed to mine, because I got it all figured out. White people over here, black people over there, Mexican people over there, and leave us alone. Right? Work hard, study hard, We work really hard at trying to fit his words, his dream, into our world. One of the things that I've noticed, I want to say maybe I pick up it on more and more and more and more, is, I listen, believe it or not, to a lot of sermons, preached locally, preached all around, and I pick up on this stuff, and honestly, I hope that's not us here. If it is, maybe that's why we don't have bigger crowds. But most people, they go to church to get their blessing. You know what I mean? Some preacher's up there promising them something that's going to happen to them, and man, I gotta do whatever I gotta try to break through and get mine, and fighting devils and everything else and trying to get it and working really, really hard. I'm telling you, if that's the way, that's the way most people think. That's kind of the American way, and it's really, really popular. But I can tell you, it's not what we're going to hear today. I can tell you that ahead of time. But that's sort of the mentality. What I got to do to get mine. And I want to say this right here. When, that's why we don't hear these things. They don't relate to us. But when are we going to imagine the world where we're not the center of the attention? When it ain't all about us. Because we're wanting our world to change. And we're wanting things to be better. But at the same time, all our focus is on us. And it's hard sometimes to understand that. Maybe as we go through this today, maybe we'll be able to see this. But we try to make sense of it. And I actually don't think that's how it works. Truth is, I don't think Jesus is coming here to make sense of our world. You know why? Our world's a mess. Honestly, we don't think it's a mess. We think we got it. We're just half a step from being right on line. Just a little shift to the left. Most people, when they come, we forget, a lot of times, Jesus says this at one time, that the harlots and the prostitutes would come into the kingdom before y'all, because they know their world's a mess. But religious people is like, you know what? When I came into the church, I was only this bad. And I made a little shift, said the right words, said the whatever the prayer is, sinner's prayer, and then boom, wow, got it. And you think, well, people don't think that way. They asked Paul, should we sin more that grace may abound? God forbid. This is kind of the mindset, So Jesus is not coming in saying, hey, guys, check this out. A little shift to the left, you guys got it. Little shift to the right, you guys got it. I'm just here to straighten it out a little bit, put the deck of cards back right, yeah. I think he's trying to upend our sense of the world. Upend it. And you can't be that. What was the declaration of the disciple or the apostles when they went to preach? Hey, these guys really make sense and everybody's loving them. No, the report was these guys are turning the world upside down. I'm just quoting the Bible to you. And try this one. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Now, if that makes sense to you, I want to turn that sense upside down. If it don't make sense to you, good. We're on the right track. And I know in our religious mind we think, oh, we get it, the meek. I read a commentary that said, meek means strength under control. And I would ask you if you believe that, but I don't want to put nobody on the spot. But but let's just see, is that what meek means? Strength under control. I mean, it sounds good, sounds viable, sounds like, hey, this is really good. The meek people are those who are really strong and they're actually very powerful and they just know when and how to use it. That's why they'll inherit the earth when the time is right. The meek, they got it together. They know when to speak, when not to speak. They're really strong. They don't show that they're strong. Pow, they're going to get it. Except, here's a problem. That's clearly not what the word meek means, at least not in English. In English, meek means submissive or easily imposed upon. You know what easily imposed upon is? That means you ain't got a whole lot of sense and you're easily used and manipulated. Honestly, right? Easily imposed upon. That's like we got sayings like taking candy from a baby. Now you're going to tell me that it makes sense for somebody in that condition to inherit the earth. Because honestly, it don't make no sense at all, does it? The Greek word here for meek is praus, P-R-A-U-S. But that doesn't mean strength under control either. It means not overly impressive. Wow, there's me. Or humbled. Not overly impressive or humbled. The Hebrew equivalent to this word meek, because everybody knows Moses was meek, right? Anav, I'm not good on Hebrew. Anav, A-N-A-V, which comes from the root word for bow down or cowering. What word do we get from cowering? Coward. You mean the coward are going to inherit the earth? What kind of world are you coming from, Jesus? Because all I hear preached is, he'll rule all nations with a rod of iron and the strength and the mighty sword, and we've got our foot on the neck of the devil, and we're winning all of these battles. And yet Jesus, in his first public sermon, says the meek, the cowards, will inherit the earth. There's nothing in the word meek here, the Greek, the Hebrew, or the English, that should ever give you the idea that it is cold strength just waiting to be let loose. And the only reason to ever read it that way is to try to make Jesus make sense in the world that we're familiar with. But what if Jesus isn't trying to be familiar? What if Jesus is trying to be disruptive? What if Jesus is actually saying what he seems to be saying, that is that the easily overpowered, that the not overly impressive, that the bowed down, that the cowering in the shadows, they will inherit the earth? I mean, think about that. I mean, because we tend to read the Bible through our modern Western assumptions. Then we try to make Jesus make sense of the world that we live in. But if you're a Jewish person here, remember the Jewish people were there from Galilee, from Jerusalem, particularly a poor rural Jewish person standing in the audience, you know exactly what he's saying. Now, what do you mean you know exactly what he's saying? Because I just quoted to you, the meek shall inherit the earth. Do you think Jesus made that up? Do you think he's quoting from the Old Testament here? Because, see, Jewish people knew the Bible. Anybody know what psalm he's quoting here? Just go ahead. Let me have it. See, I'm always kind of challenging because when Jesus would talk to the religious, the Jewish people, at least they knew what he was referring to. The meek shall inherit the earth, because these Jewish people were just like, hey, I know where this is coming from. I know the setting. I know why he's saying this. He's quoting from Psalm 37. Psalm 37, which speaks about the crushing fall of Israel and the people of God, and the victory of the wicked. Wow. A psalm which ends with this line, salvation comes from the Lord. Verse 39, the salvation of the righteous comes from the Lord. He is their stronghold in time of trouble. The Lord helps them and delivers them. He delivers them from the wicked and saves them because they take refuge in him. In verse 11, this is where it ends. But the meek will inherit the land and enjoy peace and prosperity. So if you heard Jesus say this and you was a Jew and you understood and you had been raised up and you knew scriptures, you knew Psalm 37, you knew that the meek are not the powerful under control. The meek are not the strong waiting for the right moment to spring forth into action. The meek are those who have been crushed. The meek are the ones who have been depressed. When I say depressed, I mean they've been humbled. They've been forced down. They've been forced to bow down. They've had their land, or as we read there, their earth taken away from them by the more powerful. Now, see, we don't know that. You know why? Because we white privileged Americans have taken everything from everybody. Whatever we wanted, we've taken. And I know it's hard for us to realize that, but I go back and when I see the history and I think all of this stuff that we're taught to be patriotic to, when we've raped and pillaged and stolen everything that we've ever got. Now, these people were on the other side of the Assyrians and the Babylonians and everybody else, and now even the Romans that come in and took everything from them. I tell you, I was watching this thing on a phone the other day, and it was just two things that just caught my mind. Maybe you've seen them. I don't know who put them out there. But one of them was this like an 8-year-old boy at a baseball game. And I guess they had seats down low. Maybe they're behind the dugout, and he's got like a pop and a hot dog, in his hands. He's got his jersey on, his favorite team jersey on, his baseball hat. And he's walking back to his seat. And this lady had her feet up on the wall where he couldn't pass. And somebody was filming it. He comes up, "Excuse me, ma'am." And you know what she did? Nothing. And he said, "Excuse me, ma'am," about 3 or 4 times. And this woman wouldn't acknowledge to give him the time of day. So he steps over, and when he's brought this leg over, his foot hit her leg. And you know what happened? She goes off on him. And I just think that's the America that we live in. That's the selfish, self-centered, entitled America that we live in. You know? And the other one I seen where, and these people were kind of feminine, they had invited some people over there in their backyard. They got a privacy fence up. Isn't it amazing how you got to have privacy fences? So much for love thy neighbor as thyself, right? So these people are having a cookout, and they're sitting there gathered around the grill, and the next thing you know, it starts raining, but it ain't raining. Their neighbor was over there with a water hose spraying them down from across the fence because they were making too much noise. And they wasn't doing nothing. I mean, you know, when I seen there was no alcohol, they were just having a little cookout right there. And when they said, why are you doing this? She said, I'm trying to run the grasshoppers off. The hoppers, she called them. I'm trying to run the hoppers off. And I just thought, man, this is the world that we live in. Where else in the entire world would you know that a woman wouldn't let an 8-year-old boy pass, and the neighbors wouldn't even let her neighbors enjoy a meal? Where else in the entire world could this be other than America? Greatest country in the world. It's not the greatest country in the world. It's one of the most despicable places in the world. Listen, we go around in our white privilege, and I know I'm kind of harping on this a little bit, but it's because we got cell phones, and we got cars, and we got TVs, and we got everything that you could possibly imagine. And this is what we've done with it. If you think that the world would be better if everybody was American, I would say think again. And you see, that's why I hope this comes to us. You know. I stopped by Walmart yesterday, and I seen this lady there and her husband. I guess it was her husband. They had 2 kids, 2 small kids. I mean, one of them was carry around, a few months old. The other one was probably a year and a half old. The woman is pregnant. The guy's got tattoos all over his face and arms. And they were in a little bit of a pickle, and they were struggling. And let me tell you this. Guess who stopped to help them? I mean, don't look at me. No one. No one. Why? Yeah. You know? But this is America. You know? And I was appalled, you know. And I mean, these things, guys, they get my goat a little bit. I'll be honest with you. You know, this is, you know, I know we think, oh, you know, this is, and I'm not saying, guys, that it's better in other places of the world. It's rotten everywhere. I'm just telling you, it's just rotten everywhere. So we kind of get this idea that we got it all together and we live in a Christian nation and, man, we're one step away from perfection. We better think again. The meek are not the powerful under control. The meek are not the strong waiting to spring forth at the right moment. The meek are those who have been crushed and depressed and humbled and forced to bow down. They've been forced to watch the world divided, watch the world be divided up, watch it be divvied out by those who are more wealthy, those who are more connected? Wouldn't it be cool? I always wonder, how would it be to be connected? I don't have no idea. Maybe Dad's been holding out on me. I don't know. Maybe, I know all my uncles. I keep waiting for that rich one. I ain't got one. You got one. I don't know. I'm wondering, can I trade them in? Go up to Uncle Hurst and say, hey, you're supposed to be the rich one. These people that are well connected, and you've watched them divvy up everything and hand everything else. In my mind, I look around and, Tracy and I, we saw this house one time, and I just love this house. I love the land. I love in my mind, it's kind of one. You ever have one of them dream homes? I don't know, am I the only one? You're just like, man, I would love to have that. And you picture how the house would look and how, your kids would be gathered around you and all of this other stuff. But then you know what happens? The rich people come in, swoom, 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 get it up, gut it out, redo it all. And you're just kind of sitting there thinking. I watch them divvy it all up. Take it all. They've been forced to watch the world divided up, divvied out. They don't have the power to fight back. I'm sure, if I go to the bank and say, hey, I'm here for a loan, I'm going to need $900,000 to buy this land. What do you think they're going to say? Yeah. We might give you $90, 10% interest, 5-year payment. So these people, you see, and I understand, so instead of they don't have the power to fight back, so instead they hope for a new world, a more just world. And in the Jewish culture, it was called the world to come. That's what they hope for, the world to come. Now, you know what it is today? It's go to heaven, get your mansion over there, right? It's still the same kind of mindset. But if you're a Roman from Decapolis, standing beside this Jewish person from Jerusalem, listening to Jesus from Galilee, this is kind of awkward. Right? You're the Roman person. If you're someone who looks the part, one that does project this strength and this charisma, this strength under control that we aspire to, and you're standing beside some parent that their kids got their pants on backwards, it's kind of awkward, right? What if you're hearing this and you're standing next to a Native American? This is kind of awkward, right? Because we don't think about that. Because we all have this sense that the world is being handed out. Those who have the courage and the strength and the power to get theirs will. Dog eat dog, right? And those who don't won't. It's just the way it is. And to that, Jesus says, well, I know it looks that way. I know it may seem like that. But does it have to be like that? See, there's nothing in the word meek that is meant to correspond to the inheritance. That's not the point. Not in Psalm 37. Certainly not here in Jesus' words, because this isn't Jesus trying to explain why the meek deserve the world. This is Jesus saying, maybe our imagination of who deserves the world is really the problem to begin with. Maybe that kid with their pants on backwards, maybe they're just fine the way they are. You see, the Sermon on the Mount has some awesome advice for us about how to live our lives. Yes, it does. But before that is a declaration of what Jesus sees. What he sees waiting for us just below the surface of what we're used to noticing in the world around us. And once we get a glimpse of that, once we start to get what Jesus is doing here, he's not trying to explain our world to us. He's declaring a new world among us. I'm telling you guys, you've heard it 10,000 times, maybe 1,000,000 times, and I don't know if it ever sinks in. I mean, in one, he comes preaching, behold, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. That just goes right over our heads. We don't have no idea what the kingdom is or what it's like, but Jesus is declaring a new world. He's not saying, hey, I come to fix things a little bit. He's declaring a whole new world. I'm not talking new dirt and new trees, but at the same time, behold, I make how many things new? I'm going to make 4 things new. Because you know what? You guys have got it pretty well together, and all I need to do is fix about 3 to 4 things, and man, y'all have got it. Behold, I make all things new. See, if we can get a hold of that, then all of a sudden these Beatitudes, these 8 declarations of how the world could be, they actually stop needing to be sensible and they become aspirational to us. Jesus isn't explaining the world that is, he's imagining the world as it should be. Imagining the world as it should be. And you know what, guys? It's when I say hard for us, it's nearly impossible for us to see. That's why it's so impossible for us, is why we have to have an escapism mentality to get plumb out of here, because we can't even imagine the world as it should be. So let's work our way back. I'm just working my way back up, not down the page. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. This is not about glorifying suffering. The blessing isn't in your mourning. Because I know how I've approached these verses, and maybe you have, and it's like, hey, we got to go do some suffering here. The blessing isn't in your mourning. The blessing is that God comes to you, God meets with you, God experiences your world with you. See, people forget that we have a high priest here, if we want to speak in Jewish religious terms. A religious high priest. That's how they would have understood. We as Americans, he's with you. He knows what you are going through even now. He's not up there and you got to peck him on the shoulder. Hey, God, guess what? He's right there. A world that was absolutely convinced that prosperity meant God was on your side. Jesus comes on the scene and says, God is always on your side, even when no one else believes you. And then possibly, maybe the most important line in history that Jesus says, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Theirs is the kingdom of heaven. This may be the most important statement in all of Jesus' teaching. And if we miss this, I think we miss everything that follows. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Hear me well here. Poverty of spirit is not something to aspire to. I thought it was. Poverty of spirit is not admirable. Poverty of spirit does not mean humble. It does not mean that you have an awareness of your need for God. It does not mean anything but complete and utter confusion when it comes to the things of God. Utter confusion. And I know because, you go ask Christian people, it doesn't matter if they're Christian or not, non-Christian people, pagan people, ask them about God, and I can promise you everybody knows what He's like. Everybody knows what He's for. Everybody knows what He's against. Everybody knows that, that He's on the verge of springing forth in great anger and just killing everybody. He's tired of it. He's up there patting his foot, ready to send the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse down into the world, breathing fire dragons and eating everybody alive, right? Hear what I'm telling you here. Let me put this, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom. Jesus starts His public ministry in front of the Jews from Galilee, the blue-collar, calloused hands people, the religious Jews from Jerusalem who were in concert with the Romans, and the Romans from the Decapolis, and the oppressors, the oppressed, and all of this. And Jesus begins His public ministry by saying, blessed are those who have no clue. That doesn't sound too exciting, does it? Because I want to be on this other upper echelon because I've got a clue and those people don't have a clue. Who are the people who have no clue? These are the spiritually zeros. You know what I mean? The spiritually bankrupt, the spiritual beggar, those without a hint of religion. That's who is blessed because that's the gospel. So when you've had your slice of the pie taken away from you, you've had suffering inflicted on you, and you have nowhere else to go, all of your choices only seem to make everything worse, and everybody knows it. The good news here is that God is still, and God always has been for you. And we really struggle with this, guys, because that really doesn't make sense to us. What we do is, this is an American way of thinking, this is kind of a humanistic way of thinking, we keep searching for something meritorious with each blessing. There's got to be something, even if it's being called or being elect, you did something to earn a blessing. We just kind of think that way, and we look and we think, well, they had everything taken away from them, obviously. I don't want to be the one to point the fingers, but Job has got some miserable comforters here, and religious people are the greatest miserable comforters they are. Surely there's got to be something. Or maybe if the people are prospering, surely there's something. They probably read the Bible more than you. They probably pray more than you. Probably go to church more than you. Probably do. Surely there's no way that God is just, blessed are those who don't have a clue. Just no, we can't have that. And give you an example. Well, we say the meek are self-controlled, and those who mourn, they're in touch with their emotions, and the poor in spirit, at least they're honest about their need for God. So that's why they're getting their blessing. You know. I mean, this is the thing I told you. You know, we go to church and we're sitting there and we're patting our foot saying, hey, preacher, tell me how I'm going to get my blessing. Tell me what I need to do. Give me the 5 steps. Give me the 4 steps. Tell me I need to get my blessing here. Jesus is wrecking that in this sermon here. It's not what Jesus is saying here. Jesus is saying your concept of God and who deserves God's attention is fundamentally broken. It's messed up. And so before I can tell you anything about you and how you can live your life, I need to tell you about God. Because I need to clear the table. I need to declare some things before we even get going. We need to know who God is, right? I mean, in most of our minds, we're just like, we don't really want to know who God is. Just tell me what I got to do to get mine. I mean, maybe you're a Roman person here or a Galilean day worker. Maybe you're a religious leader from Jerusalem. But let's get this straight from the start. God is on your side. Did you just hear that? Let me clarify. God is on your side. God is on the side of the person beside you. I know that's hard for us to believe. Because you know that God is for the religious fundamentalist that looks down his nose at you. God is for them. God is for the worker who barely has time to rest, much less contemplate on holy matters. God is for the Roman pagan that can't make heads or tails of this Jewish teacher and why everybody's fascinated with him. God is for them. God is for us all. That's Jesus' message. God is for us. That in whatever you may have been told, you know, you're a failure, whatever you've internalized of the narrative of the world around you, none of that is true. You know, I kind of look, you know, I love kind of watching politics in one sense because, you know, they got everybody categorized, didn't they? Oh, we got to get the white evangelical vote. We got to get the black vote. We got to get the blue collar vote. We got to get, you know, we got to get the Spanish American vote. We got to get the Native American vote. We got to get the Jewish vote. Everybody's in the category, ain't they? Everybody's in a category. And God is for us all. God, believe this or not, is already on your side. You see, when I told these people this up there the other day, trust me, it floored them. Because they don't think God is on your side until you make the appropriate steps and say the right incantation. the right prayer. And then God magically appears on your side. I can tell you God was on your side long before you ever did anything. God was on your side because why? Because that's who God is. God is love. And you know what? I'm going to say this. I hope this wows you. Maybe it won't. Maybe you've heard me long enough to hear this. But I can tell you this. God is for you. God is on your side. And there ain't a D thing you can do to stop it. I said D. I didn't say the whole thing, but, beavers make them. You can't stop it. That's who God is. And I want to be forceful. I want to rattle your cage a little bit, as the guy says. Blessed are those who don't have a clue because the divine has come to them. God has come to you. Wow. He's come to you in the person of Jesus. We're sitting over here, Jesus, stand back over there a little minute. I got to get my Elijah anointing. Jesus will just sleep in the back of the boat. No, wait a minute, I got to get my Daniel prophecy anointing on. Oh, hang on there a minute, Jesus. Hang on, I'm about to get anointed like you. God in Jesus has come to us. God in Jesus, I will never leave you. I will never forsake you. If you can get this, if you can sink this somewhere deep down in your bones, it'll change everything about you. It'll open up new life inside of you. It'll invite you to journey with Jesus and follow Jesus and sink your teeth into the teachings of Jesus. But if we don't get this, if we don't get that we are already completely loved before we ever take a step towards God. Now, I'm going to say something controversial right here, because I know that we don't like this, but we all kind of shake our heads and we say, hey, we're all loved of God and God loves us all. What about all the people that the church has excluded? Because, the church is really good at drawing lines and saying you can come in and you can't. Hey, you got an alternative lifestyle. And really what we're saying here is God really loves the white Americans who have it all together. And anybody who has an alternative lifestyle, God is really not for them. See, this is meant to be kind of in your face. Now, again, some people would say, well, God just, anything goes. I didn't say anything goes. God wants the best for us. He really does. And we could say all of this other stuff, but listen, you could smoke 5 packs of cigarettes every day, and God will still love you. And God wants you to quit. Why? Because it's hurting your health. I know I was talking to a lady yesterday. Her dad has got lung cancer, and then he got pneumonia on top of that. It's horrible, right? It's not, God is for us. We can have horrible diets. We can do all kinds of terrible things to our own selves. God is not for that stuff. He's not for anything that harms us. But at the same time, He'll love you while you're living alternative, while you're smoking cigarettes, while you're doing whatever, chewing tobacco, See, if we don't get this, that we're already completely loved before we ever, God is not sitting up there saying, boy, I sure would like to love Tim, but if I could just get Tim to quote these 2 verses and twirl around in a circle 3 times, then I could start loving him. That's crazy. If we don't get this, then what we'll end up doing is trying harder and harder, and God will seem farther and farther away. Now, here's the thing about the Sermon on the Mount. If you don't get that at the start, that God comes to you in your poverty. God came to all of us. Listen to this. God came to us in our poverty when we didn't have a clue. See, that's very important, isn't it? God loves you in your poverty. God will love you forever in your poverty. If you never move out of your spiritual poverty, guess what? Let me just put this on a real side to you. Let's say that you had twins, and one of the twins was very go-getter, energetic, and the other was autistic. Would your love be any different to those kids? And we shake our heads and we think, well, God, and I'm telling you what, and you know, some people here are born spiritually autistic, and they're never, ever on this side going to get it. Does this mean God has said, you know what, you need to do something about your own autism? We know that's not possible, right? At this juncture, that's not possible. You're in this condition, there you are. Accept a miracle from God, there you are. So again, it's going to put us, God coming to us. There's nothing else. God comes to us in our poverty. If we don't get that, then we will read the rest of the sermon as rule after rule after rule to try to live up to, and that is exactly the opposite of what Jesus is trying to say, because I can promise you, as we get on down, we're going to say, oh, look at a woman, lust after, do this, and oh, you know, we got to be turning the other cheek. All they are is rules. All the Sermon on the Mount is going to be is a bunch of rules for us to try to do if we don't get this. That's why it's important. Everything Jesus is about to say is predicated on the fact that the world is not what you think it is. Love is not what you think it is. God is not who you think He is. Because all of it is so much better than what you can possibly imagine. And you're already, right now, perfectly beloved of God. Let me say this. We'll get ready and close out here in just a second. You can be competent in many things, but you cannot be competent in God. He's too big. He's too wonderful. As soon as you think you got your little puny brain around the love of God. I mean, that's the first thing we want to do is get Him figured out and put in the box real quick. Ain't going to happen. It ain't going to happen. You might as well settle it. Ain't going to happen. Jesus begins His public ministry by saying, that's okay, for blessed are the spiritually incompetent. You do not need to do the right things. Listen to this. You do not need to say the right things. You do not need to know the right things or believe the right things, because God is near you already, even now. And with all the expectation that we have on us, work and family and all the pressure to try to measure up, and the standards are here, and you know, all of these standards, our whole countries are based on standards and who's in and who's out, and you know, all of those standards, all of that, and then we feel the pressure that we got to measure up to that. May we first learn to sink into our poverty. To know that you never measured up, and that God never cared, because God is nothing like you've ever experienced before. God didn't care. May you know yourself as God knows you today. May you know yourself as God knows you today. How does God know you today? As blessed, as beloved, as welcomed, as accepted, as invited into everything you might become. If only you could begin to see yourself as beautifully as God sees you right now. For blessed are the poor in spirit, for the kingdom of God has come near to you today. I will quit with that.